The night was deep, and the city lights cast a dim, yellowish glow. Jack Williams sat in the driver's seat of his taxi, lighting a cigarette and taking a deep drag. He had been driving the night shift for over a decade and was no stranger to the eerie and strange occurrences of the city. However, what happened that night would forever change his perception of reality. At 3 a.m., the taxi stand was nearly empty. Jack stretched lazily, preparing to take one last ride before calling it a night. Just then, a woman in a flowing white dress appeared before him. Her long hair draped over most of her face, and her voice was soft, yet chilling. "Driver, can you take me somewhere?" Jack nodded, motioning for her to get in. "Where to?" She gave him an address on the outskirts of town, a remote area far from the main roads. Jack hesitated for a moment. Going to such a place at this hour didn't sit right with him. But work was work. He started the engine. The ride was eerily silent. Through the rearview mirror, Jack glanced at the woman. She kept her head down, gripping the edges of her dress tightly, as if something weighed heavily on her mind. "Miss, are you heading home?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. The woman slowly lifted her head, revealing a pale, ghostly face. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Home? Yes, I'm going home." A cold shiver crawled down Jack's spine. He tried to shake off the unease and focused on the road. However, he soon noticed the temperature inside the car dropping drastically, an icy chill creeping over him. He turned on the heater, but it made no difference. Before long, the taxi entered a narrow, unlit road surrounded by darkness. The headlights were the only source of illumination. Suddenly, the woman spoke. "Driver, can you stop here?" Jack hesitated before pulling over. The woman slowly turned her head toward him, a strange smile forming on her lips. "Driver, don't you find this place familiar?" Jack stiffened. He glanced around and felt a cold sweat forming on his forehead. He knew this place. 5 years ago, a terrible accident had occurred here. A taxi lost control and plunged into the nearby river. The driver died on the spot, but the female passenger's body was never found. "You're—" Jack's voice trembled. The woman chuckled, her laughter distant, as if echoing from an abyss. "5 years ago? Weren't you also working the night shift?" "That night, wasn't there a girl who hailed your cab?" A memory flashed in Jack's mind. A young woman, eerily similar to this one, had flagged him down that night, requesting a ride to this very road. But at the time, he found the area too isolated and made an excuse to refuse her before driving away. "Driver, I never made it home that night. Will you take me now?" As soon as she spoke, Jack felt his limbs freeze, his breath turning shallow. Panic surged through him. He yanked the door open and bolted out, only to trip and crash onto the ground. Gasping, he turned back to look. His taxi was empty. The woman was gone. Relief barely settled before he noticed something horrifying. The glass of his car window reflected a pale face, inches from him. Jack screamed, his body shaking violently. He turned to run, but something unseen grabbed his ankle and yanked him backward. A powerful force dragged him toward the taxi. "No! No! Let me go!" Jack clawed at the dirt, his nails digging into the ground. But the invisible grip was relentless, pulling him inch by inch toward the car. Suddenly, the radio inside the taxi crackled to life, emitting eerie static. Then, a familiar yet distorted voice whispered, "Driver, this time you can't refuse." The car doors slammed shut. The headlights flickered. The engine roared to life, without a driver. The taxi sped into the darkness, taking Jack with it. The next morning, the taxi was discovered abandoned on the side of the desolate road. Jack sat motionless in the driver's seat, his eyes wide open, a ghostly smile frozen on his face. In the passenger seat lay a tattered white dress, still damp with water stains. As soon as she spoke, Jack felt his limbs freeze, his breath turning shallow. Panic surged through him. He yanked the door open and bolted out, only to trip and crash onto the ground. Gasping, he turned back to look. His taxi was empty. The woman was gone. Relief barely settled before he noticed something horrifying. The glass of his car window reflected a pale face, inches from him. Jack screamed, his body shaking violently. He turned to run, but something unseen grabbed his ankle and yanked him backward. A powerful force dragged him toward the taxi. "No! No! Let me go!" Jack clawed at the dirt, his nails digging into the ground. But the invisible grip was relentless, pulling him inch by inch toward the car. Suddenly, the radio inside the taxi crackled to life, emitting eerie static. Then, a familiar yet distorted voice whispered, "Driver, this time you can't refuse." The car doors slammed shut. The headlights flickered. The engine roared to life, without a driver. The taxi sped into the darkness, taking Jack with it. The next morning, the taxi was discovered abandoned on the side of the desolate road. Jack sat motionless in the driver's seat, his eyes wide open, a ghostly smile frozen on his face. In the passenger seat lay a tattered white dress, still damp with water stains.
All right, so tonight we're gonna dive into a story. It's an unsettling story, and I think it's going to be a good one. So, picture this. You know how it is late at night. The city's quiet. You got those street lights. You know that kind of yellowish glow they have, a little hazy.
Yeah.
And a taxi. You just go about its business. You know, just driving around.
Yeah, just another night.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then things get really strange, like really, really strange. And that's what we're talking about tonight. The story of this taxi driver, Jack Williams, and what happened to him on one of his late night shifts. It's one of those stories that just makes you wonder, you know, about what else is out there.
Absolutely. It's one of those stories that gets under your skin. You start thinking about all those late nights, those quiet streets. Makes you wonder what might be lurking in the shadows, what we think we know about the world, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of why we wanted to do this deep dive, you know, to really break this story down, look at the details, and see if we can figure out what makes it so creepy. And maybe, just maybe, what it all means. So to get started, let's set the scene. It's 3:00 a.m.
Oh, 3:00 a.m. That's the witching hour, right?
Right. That time when things feel different, everything's quiet, almost too quiet, and every little sound just seems amplified, you know?
Oh, yeah, like every little creak and groan, suddenly it's like, well, what was that?
Exactly. And that's when our taxi driver, Jack, sees a woman approaching his cab. She's wearing this long white dress.
A white dress, huh? Interesting. Immediately makes me think of ghosts, you know, all those classic horror movies. White dress billowing in the wind.
Right. It's like that image is burned into our minds. It's spooky. And it's in the story, too. So she's got this white dress on, and her hair is long, covering her face. You can't really see her. And when she speaks, her voice is really soft, almost a whisper. Chilling, really.
Chilling is a good word for it. It's like, you know, a whisper can be more unsettling than a shout sometimes, because you have to strain to hear it and your mind starts filling in the gaps, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It definitely adds to the creepiness. And then she tells Jack where she wants to go. Way out on the edge of town, like a really remote area.
Yeah.
And you can kind of sense that Jack's getting this bad feeling about it. Like his gut is telling him something isn't right.
It's interesting you mentioned that gut feeling, because I think we all have that instinct, right? That little voice inside that says, uh-oh, this doesn't feel good. Sometimes we listen to it, sometimes we don't. But in stories like this, it always seems to pop up.
Absolutely. It's like our internal alarm system warning us about danger. In this case, Jack probably should have listened to it. But he agrees to take her, and they start driving. And as they're driving, it gets really quiet in the car, like an oppressive silence. Jack glances at the woman in his rearview mirror, and she's just sitting there, head down, clutching her dress like she's scared of something. So he tries to break the silence, you know, just be polite, and asks her, "Miss, are you heading home?"
So simple, but loaded with tension, right? Just trying to make conversation, but you can sense the underlying unease.
Yeah, and her answer doesn't help. She says in this quiet, almost breathless voice, "Home."
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going home. And it's like, on the surface, it's a normal answer. But the way she says it, combined with everything else that's going on, it just feels wrong. Like, what does home even mean to her?
It's like she's not really present, you know? Like her mind is somewhere else entirely. And that's always a little unnerving, right? When someone seems detached from their surroundings, like they're not really there. It makes you wonder what they're thinking about, where their mind is.
Yeah, it's unsettling. And as if things weren't creepy enough, the temperature in the car suddenly plunges, like it gets freezing cold. And Jack, he's got the heater on full blast, but it doesn't make a difference. It's this unnatural chill, like an icy hand gripping the car.
I've heard that before, that sudden drop in temperature. It's a common thread in a lot of paranormal stories, and it's always described the same way. This bone-chilling cold that seems to come out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's one of those details that really gets to you, you know?
Yeah.
Makes it feel real. Like you can almost feel that chill yourself just listening to the story. And it makes you wonder if there's something to it, like some kind of energy shift that causes a change in temperature.
It's definitely a recurring motif in these kinds of narratives. Makes you wonder if there's some basis in reality, some scientific explanation maybe. Or maybe it's something we just don't understand yet.
Maybe. Either way, it's pretty freaky. So they keep driving, and pretty soon they turn onto this narrow, dark road. No street lights or anything, just trees lining the sides of the road. And it's really dark, like the headlights are the only things illuminating anything. And then the woman tells Jack to stop. She turns towards him, and there's this strange smile on her face. And she asks him, "Driver, don't you find this place familiar?" And the way she asks it, it's like she knows something he doesn't. Like it's a challenge or a threat.
It's interesting how that one question changes everything, right? Suddenly it's not just a random encounter anymore. It's personal, like she's forcing him to confront something.
Right. It's like the whole atmosphere of the story shifts in that moment. And Jack, he starts to think, and then it hits him. This is the exact spot where a terrible accident happened 5 years ago. Another taxi driver, he lost control of his car and crashed. The driver died instantly, but the passenger, a young woman, her body was never found.
Oh, wow. So the place itself already has this heavy, tragic history attached to it. That's got to weigh on Jack's mind, right? Like all of a sudden, he's in the same spot where another driver met his end.
Yeah, and it gets worse. The woman then asks Jack if he was working the night shift 5 years ago. And then she says, and I'm quoting here, "Wasn't there a girl who hailed your cab?" And it's like she knows. She knows about that night.
It's like the story is looping back on itself, right? Past and present colliding in this unsettling way. And the fact that she knows about that night, it suggests a connection, something deeper going on than just a random encounter.
And then comes the real bombshell. The woman says, "Driver, I never made it home that night, will you? Take me now." And that's when Jack remembers. 5 years ago on that very night, a young woman had tried to hail his cab at a nearby diner. She wanted to go to this same remote area, but Jack, he had a bad feeling about it and refused to take her.
Wow, the refusal, that's a powerful element because it introduces the idea of choice, right? And maybe even guilt. What if he had taken her that night? Would things have been different? It makes you think about all the little choices we make every day and how they might have unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And you can imagine what's going through Jack's mind at this point. It's like all the pieces of the puzzle are falling into place, but the picture they're forming is terrifying. He's in a car with a woman who might be the ghost of someone who died 5 years ago, and he might have been able to prevent it.
That's a heavy burden to carry. The weight of that what if. It's like he's being forced to confront the ghost of his own past decision.
Yeah, and it's too much for him. He panics, manages to open the car door, and stumbles out. He falls to the ground, scrambles back, and for a second he thinks he's safe. But then he looks up and sees her. In the car window, inches from his face, is the woman's pale, ghostly face.
Oh, that's terrifying. That sudden reappearance. It's like she's not bound by the normal rules of space and time. One minute she's in the car, the next she's right there next to him. It's like something out of a nightmare.
Totally. And Jack, he screams, tries to get away, but then he feels something grab his ankle. This unseen force is pulling him back towards the car, back towards her.
That unseen force, that's a classic element of the supernatural. You can't fight what you can't see. It's like a metaphor for the feeling of being trapped, powerless against something beyond your control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as he's being dragged back, the taxi radio suddenly comes to life. It starts with this static, that spine-chilling sound that old radios make.
Oh, yeah. Like nails on a chalkboard, that kind of static sends shivers down your spine.
Exactly. And then, through the static, Jack hears a voice. It sounds familiar, but it's distorted, twisted, and it says, "Driver, this time you can't refuse."
Wow, this time you can't refuse. That's chilling. It's like he's being given a second chance, but it's not a chance, it's a command. Like fate is intervening.
Yeah, it's like he's being forced to atone for his past decision, and there's nothing he can do about it. The car doors slam shut, the headlights start flickering, and the engine roars to life, even though no one is behind the wheel. And then the taxi speeds off down that dark road with Jack trapped inside.
It's like the car itself is possessed, right? Taking on a life of its own. And Jack is just along for the ride, completely powerless to stop it. That's a really powerful image, the driverless car speeding off into the unknown.
Yeah, it's like a symbol of his fate being taken out of his hands. And that's where the story ends. The next morning, the taxi is found abandoned on that same road. Jack is still in the driver's seat, but he's not moving. His eyes wide open, staring straight ahead, and there's this strange, almost eerie smile on his face. And in the passenger seat, there's a white dress, all ripped and torn, and it's still damp, like it's been soaked in water.
That's a haunting image. The damp dress, it's like a physical reminder of the woman's presence, a piece of the supernatural left behind in the real world. And that smile on Jack's face, it's so unsettling. What does it mean? Was he terrified, resigned, or was it something else entirely?
We don't know, and that's what makes this story so disturbing, so thought-provoking. We're left with so many questions. What really happened to Jack? Did he encounter the ghost of the woman who died in the accident? Was it some kind of vengeful spirit punishing him for refusing to help her?
Or was it all in his head? A manifestation of his guilt, his regret over not taking that fare 5 years ago. Maybe his mind created this whole elaborate supernatural scenario as a way to punish himself.
Right. It's like the line between the supernatural and the psychological is completely blurred in this story. And that's what makes it so effective, so terrifying. Because it could be either, or maybe even both. And it makes you wonder, what if there are things out there we just don't understand? What if our choices, even the seemingly insignificant ones, have consequences that echo through time, that come back to haunt us in ways we could never imagine?
It's a chilling thought. Makes you think twice about those little decisions we make every day, doesn't it? Like, what if we're all just one wrong turn away from a terrifying encounter with the unknown?
Exactly. And that's the question we're left with for all of you listening tonight. What do you think? Was Jack Williams the victim of a vengeful spirit? Or was it something else entirely, something darker, something rooted in his own past? And what about you? Have you ever had an experience, a moment, that defied explanation? A brush with the uncanny that left you questioning everything you thought you knew? Let us know. We want to hear your stories.
Because maybe, just maybe, by sharing our experiences, by exploring the darkness together, we can start to shed some light on the mysteries that surround us.